Hey folks, and thanks for joining me as we continue our journey in building this RFM Sherman with full interior. This one's going to turn out to be Fury. Last time we painted the interior of the hull. This time we're going to be painting the interior of the turret. Let's do it. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is decide exactly how we're going to assemble this interior, and specifically they gave us earlier late version to choose from. And although the Sherman that was used in the movie as Fury had some later upgrades to it, we're going to be going with the early version to try to make it a little bit more historically accurate. And what I mean by that is that the Fury in the movie had some upgrades from the Korean War inside of it, so we want to make sure we keep it to World War II. So we're going to go with the early form here. Now we're going to add in some steel textures, as you guys have seen me do many a time on this channel, using some Tamiya putty and airbrush cleaner, which, by the way, little tip for you guys, is the same thing as Tamiya thin cement. It's 1% different, but it works exactly the same. So we're going to mix this up in our little stainless steel dish, and we're going to apply this to the inside panels of this turret. And what we're going to do is just use a stiffling motion, because it is going to melt the plastic a little bit, and when we use that stiffling motion, it's going to create a nice steel texture. So if you guys are new here, I do appreciate you guys stopping by. Please, if you like what you see today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, because I do read every comment you guys post, and I do respond as well. And I thank you guys in advance for that. Now, getting back to the turret, you can see I did the entire interior of the turret with that steel texture because the turret was cast on this tank. Although the body was rolled steel, the turret was still cast. So we did the cast texture throughout. And it would be the same texture inside as it is outside, so that's why we still do with the steel texture on the inside of the tank. Now some of these components are for the turret controls, some are for the radio system. So what I did was I pre-drilled a bunch of holes in them using some small carbide drill bits, and that's just preparing for later, as we're going to add a lot of wiring and stuff that's missing in this kit. So I will say RFM has included a lot of really cool details, and you can see some of the pre-molded on wires back there, but I want to add some more. For example, on the microphone mouthpieces here, like the part you would talk into with the button, it's missing the little hangers, the wire that you would use to hang it up. And interestingly enough, RFM gave us photo etch for the hanger, but not for the microphone, so they actually just made it so you could glue it in there. So I just used a little bit of VMS black glue, CA glue, and some activator to get this little piece of copper wire on there, and then I can actually hang it on that hanger as originally intended. Again, adds a little bit more realism than just the kit parts. So RFM again has done an amazing job at capturing a lot of great little details inside this tank, but I just want to add a little bit more realism to it. So you can see how they look when we have both of our microphones hung up there on their little hooks. Now you can see how this interior is coming along as we're adding in all the plastic parts, and it's hard to show these turret interiors right side up because there isn't much to see through the hatches. I mean, you can see, but it's very difficult to see through. So I'm going to show it to you upside down. But here you can see it right side up without the gun in the way. Kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. So with all the plastic pieces put on there, we can move over to the gun. So here we can see our breech. We have our 30 cal coax machine gun and our sight for the gunner. All there. So we're going to add in this last piece to show you everything goes together so well. There's a little bit of cleanup required for some of those seams and things like that, which you can use glue and fill just like you normally would and fill them in, but the details are incredible. The other thing I want to show you guys is on the turret ring. It can be a little tricky to fit the photo etch that RFM includes into the inside of this ring, but you want to line up these little notches that they have and apply CA in between those areas, because you're going to actually attach some other components for the turret controls there later. So you can see there's a couple different pieces that make up the turret ring interior with the photo etch, and there's even some little locator nubs to help you with putting in those photo etch pieces. So again, RFM just doing a really good job with this kit. So I want to try something a little bit different on these seats. So what I did was I took my curved blade and a sanding stick and I just roughed up these seats, just because they're pretty thick padded seats. I just wanted to make them look a little bit worn, and I didn't want to mold on anything like I did on the hull interior, just because they're a little bit different of a seat. And then here I'm working on the steel textures for the bottom part of the cast turret. So this is the part where the radio is going to go. Here we can see that radio. Again, incredibly good details by RFM. We're just going to glue that down to the back, and then we can actually start putting in some of these other parts as well. So this is more of the turret controls. This is what actually controls the turret to make it spin. What I also thought was interesting is that RFM actually included those wires in the back there. If you see, there are some wires to interconnect the radios. So it's neat. They did include a lot of details right out the gate, and even a few 76mm rounds down there with some photo etch. So I said earlier I wanted to add some more realism, so I'm going to start with this really thin wire. This is the same wire. I think I want to say it's like 32 gauge or 26 gauge. I'm no wire expert. I just know it's really thin wire. It's the same stuff I used for the tops of these microphones. I also curled them around a piece of styrene and then used CA to put them in place into those holes I mentioned that I had pre-drilled into these radio boxes, and then obviously into the bottom of the microphones. Now the black circles that you see on those radio boxes is CA filler that I used to fill in a sprue gate that was on each of these boxes on the face, which is really weird. RFM's been really good thus far about keeping their sprue gates hidden, but just on those boxes, it's like they got them backwards or something, I don't know. By the way, here we can see what the results look like with those two curled copper wires in. And I did use reference photos for all of this. I can put those links in the description for you guys if you want to see the website that I used that had a lot of really great photos. I did also use a Tankograd book though for the turret interior, because my online resource wasn't super duper detailed in what's in the turret interior. But again, I was able to find enough reference photos to see how these microphone wires looked. So you can see I'm just hooking up one microphone to each radio box. Now each of these radio boxes was tied internally to the radio, and that's, you can actually see that RFM put the wires molded into the sides of the turret, which again is pretty cool. So the other thing that was missing in the photos that I had found were all of the connecting electronics, like control wires, and there's also, I'm sure, some oil lines and things like that were missing to connect all of this turret control system together. So just looking at my reference photo, I'm connecting all the places that I could see where there were controls. So just below this, what you can't see right now in the basket, is the the turret controls, like the foot controls for the gunner as well. So after I put all those lead wires in place, I just moved them, kind of tucked them back behind like I had seen them in my reference photo, and that's just the first few of many more wires we're going to add in there. And this thing is really starting to come together, adding all them extra wires in. So here I'm just adding a few more. What I did was I set the basket just loosely in place. It's not glued in, I just set it there. I'm holding it in place so I can kind of pre-wire in those wires that I couldn't see where they all connected to, but I could definitely see they all tucked behind there. So at this point we have all of our parts ready to paint, and we're going to start with Mr. Metal Primer, and we're going to prime all those metal parts we just added. Again, you can see all the details that we added in. There's even another wire that I forgot to film going from the back of those radio boxes. After we have all of our metal primed, we're going to go over to Mr. Surfacer's black primer. This has easily become my favorite primer for now. I'm still trying them out, but I mean, just look how them steel textures are coming out of there. I think it looks really good when we paint black over all them steel textures. It gives it that nice rough cast texture. Just look at that, beautiful, brings out those textures, and you get to see all your hard work come to fruition with this beautiful black backdrop after it's primed. I always like taking a moment to reflect on this part before I move on to painting. So I actually broke from my norm and I used Tamiya paints this time. So I started with flat white and flat black to make a gray, very similar to what I did on the lower hull. So it's not out of the norm for this build, but out of my norm for my other builds. Typically I don't use Tamiya paints, but again, I wanted to try them out just because it was a gray and white. So I have plenty of Tamiya paints to use, and they thin down really nice to give you that nice mottled effect as you saw I did on the lower hull. Again, if you didn't see how I painted the lower hull, definitely go back and check out that video. I'll leave a link in the description for you guys. So after I did the first coat of 80-20 black and white, well, white to black I should say, I switched to about 90-10, so a little bit more white than black. Really what I did was I just took the gray mixture I had and added more flat white into it. So my percentages are just estimates, so you don't necessarily want to measure right off them. I'm just estimating. And I kind of worked my way up till I got to 100% just flat white. And the reason for this is because we're creating fake shadows and highlighting smaller components, because smaller components don't reflect as much light, so they're harder to see if everything is a monotone color. So we want to use flat white to add in highlights and things like that. And here you can see that difference on the top of the gun, how much brighter that is. So after I got the base coat done, I came back with Vallejo's black. This is my favorite black paint to use for brush painting. It's just a flat black. It's really easy to thin down and apply. Brushes really well. I used AK's, or not AK's, it's actually Ammo's polished metal there to give you that reflective look of the inside of the periscope, and then came back over with black because I painted outside the lines. Shame on me. So I'm really liking AK's 3rd gen paints, so I wanted to try them out again here just as I did on the lower hull. And I did a little bit of color gradation here with the olive drab base and some other similar olive drab colors that we're going to talk about here in a minute. I just went over all the parts inside the turret interior that would be olive drab, which would be these water canisters, the radio boxes, electronic boxes really, and also the microphones. I painted the wires with Vallejo black. Same kind of routine as you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of blacks, olive drabs. I mean, that's kind of what we're seeing inside these American tanks. And I really am liking these AK 3rd gens because similar to Vallejo's, they thin down really nice and brush on beautifully, but they also work very well in an airbrush versus Vallejo. Vallejo's great for brushing, but not very good for airbrushing. AK is really nice all-rounder. And I haven't found a downside yet to using them. Like, you know, being an all-rounder, you'd think there'd be a downside, but I haven't found one yet. So doing these seats, I used Tankograd as the base, and then I kind of started mixing in Schwarzgrau and a little bit of white, just to give it that faded, worn look. I actually liked this look better than how I did the ones in the lower hull, so I was really happy with that result. You saw I used red to do the foot controls, turret controls for the gunner, and then here I'm using that same red but thinned down to kind of create a gradient on the fire extinguisher, again just as I had done on the lower hull in the last video. So once we have the fire extinguisher done, we can move on to some other colors as well, namely back to gray, I guess I should say, for these seats. So I did all these seats the same as I did that first one, but just so you see how I painted them and weathered them down. And moving back to the radio, I used 3 different grades of olive drab from AK and 3rd gen range again. And what I was trying to do was just single out the different components of the radio, so that way it would give a more visually appealing look by having different components be a different shade of olive drab. And interestingly enough, my reference photos actually confirmed that even though all the radios were painted in olive drab, the different components were painted by different companies or something, and they actually were different shades of olive drab, so it's not completely unrealistic. And what I did here is I'm showing you the 3 different paints that I used, and you can see how what I did to get grades in between, I just mixed them at the top left and the top right there to get those nice gradations. This is a really nice trick if you want to add any kind of color modulation or add visual texture when you're brush painting. And when it's thinned down like this, it looks right like as if it was airbrushed, or even adds maybe a little bit of an artistic look to it with your brush. So after that, I came back in with black Vallejo, thinned down to get in between those knobs. Then I used Ammo's polished metal to brighten up all of the knobs and stuff that are on this radio. And I really think this helps bring all those knobs out. And they really were silver. Again, I'm using reference photos for all of this to try to get it as accurate as possible. And I think that radio turned out really, really well just with acrylics so far. Keep in mind, we've only used acrylics. And we're continuing on with acrylics as I'm using polished metal to paint the gun breech. This part would have been polished metal looking because it would have been the part where the shells went in and out of. Now the outside of the breech here is always an olive drab. I just stuck with AK's olive drab base, and then I actually used the brownish green for that part on top there that was also painted camo. Again, trying to highlight the smaller parts in a brighter color so they stand out. I had also painted the 30 cal coax machine gun on the side, just using black and then white for the parts that match the turret, or the gun I should say, and then I attached them. And here you can see I'm just holding the wall pieces in place to show you what it looks like, and it's really starting to come together beautifully. So moving on to the weathering stage, I did do some dry brush gunmetal on the 30 cal coax, and then I'm using a light olive green by Ammo to add a little bit of light chipping on the radio boxes and other olive drab things inside the turret. And then I moved on to my tried and true Vallejo German camo black brown for chipping. Now I do use VMS's brush retarder for this as well, so you thin it down and then use brush retarder and then use a piece of foam here, and I actually used a paint clamp this time to hold my foam, and then you just gently push on the edges of your parts and you get this nice chipping effect. This isn't anything new for the veterans on my channel. You guys know this is pretty much my technique for chipping interiors. I don't do much brush chipping on the interiors only because these are such small parts that using a piece of foam like this to do the sponge method really works well. And you can see how we're just chipping edges of things and trying to make things look a little bit worn. I'm not going too over the top just to get the edges. Now I'm using my favorite method for creating earth tones, which is pigments to start. So I'm using Europe Earth to put some earthy tones and pigments down, and this actually gives you a little bit of volume as well. And then I'm coming in with Ammo's Earth Effects enamel. This is actually the earth color as well, and the enamel actually reacts with the pigment and binds it down. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking just odorless thinner in my same brush. So I clean my brush out, just put some odorless thinner in it, and I'm just thinning it out and kind of fanning it, stippling it to give it that like wet, muddy look, like, you know, there had been dirt there and mud, and it's kind of drying on the edges and a little bit wetter in the middle. So that's why you see I put the earth tones down in the middle and then kind of feathered it out from there. It makes it look a little bit more natural, like the crew had been walking around there with muddy boots and it flaked off and whatnot. Next up, we're going to be using Ammo's interior wash. This is kind of like a greenish brown wash. It's really good for interiors, and it is an enamel, so it flows really well into those little details and crevices without ruining your finish on the interiors. This worked really well for white because it is kind of a greenish. It just gives it a grimy, you know, dirty tone. And again, you can come back with enamel odorless thinner and clean up those edges. I did also give a little bit of a wash to the edge of this gun breech, which I thought looked really nice in the end when it dried. After the enamels are put on, we're actually ready to assemble this thing. So I assemble everything at this stage using clear CA glue, and you can see how the basket just ties in there. It's only like half a basket because the loader's rounds are in the hull. So again, go back and check out that video if you want to see the interior build on the hull and painting and weathering. But if not, you can always stick around to the end of this video and see what it looks like when it all comes together. Hey, if you do like what you're seeing, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd really appreciate it. And also, don't forget that if you'd like to support my work, you're welcome to check me out on Patreon as well, where I'm putting daily updates on Patreon for my patrons to be able to see the work progress that I'm making on my workbench. If you want to check that out, go for it. Now, after we have everything painted and assembled, we're actually just going to test fit this top of the turret, and I'm happy with this result because now I can pull this turret off to display most of the inside. I'm a little disappointed I couldn't get the gun, but I'm happy with how this turned out. So I just wanted to thank you guys all for watching, and I hope you enjoy this reveal. Alrighty folks, again I want to thank you all for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future content as we continue to build this Sherman tank that will be Fury and set in a scene from the movie. I wanted to give a special shout out to my patrons who help support my work. These guys have been seeing updates on an almost daily basis from my workbench, so some of this stuff seems a little bit not so new to them, but it's because they're seeing almost live updates from my workbench. I also want to give a quick shout out to my friends over at Hobby Time Modelers. We do stream Fridays and Sundays if you want to check us out. Again, please subscribe if you want to continue to see more, and don't forget to check out the previous build in this series where we did the lower hull. I'll see you guys soon as we finish up the exterior.